Hi, everyone. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is maybe the most useful thing I can do is I'm going to teach you all how to wash your hands correctly. Because, all right, so hold your hands out to the imaginary hand soap sanitizer. Get a squirt. It should be about, like a quarter size on your hand. Now you're going to put your hands together. You're going to do this part, right? Are you done? No. Now you're going to flip one hand over. And you're going to go between your fingers. And you see, now you're getting the back of your hand. You're getting between your fingers. You slide all the way up. That's where and now you're going to do the other side. Now do you think you're done? No. Now you get to do like a good, like a thriller moment. Like make your claws. So make some claws. And you're going to take your claw and you're going to put it in that little bit of juice that's still in your palm. And you're going to make another claw. And you're going to put in a little juice on that side. And now you're still not done. Now you have to do the thumbs up, because you have not even disinfected your thumbs yet, at all. If you think about it, like we did this, we did this, we did this. We haven't done our thumbs at all. So you're going to take a thumb and go, do a little thumb, and then do the other side. And now you've done proper hand hygiene. So it's like 5 steps. It's together, backs, claws, thumbs, done. So you got that. We'll quiz you later. I have this thing. So today, what I wanted to do, because I think we have this moment of like, COVID happened. COVID's still happening. COVID will continue to happen. But we have this sort of moment in infectious disease. Maybe we have a little bit of will, I hope, that we can maybe work to stop or prevent infectious diseases, antimicrobial resistance, all these things. So the presentation today, and you can please stop me if I say like letter things that no one knows what they are, because I'll do that. But it's really kind of giving an overview of where we are with infectious diseases and kind of maybe where some opportunities are. So that's the idea. I hope it works. So, what's it going to take to put a dent in both COVID and infectious diseases at all? So here's my disclosure. So sometimes I go by the name Mark. It's a very complicated thing. So if you Google me, you'll probably do better Googling me as Mark. But if you want to stalk me, I'm just helping you out. Here's some keywords. But some disclosures. I have a company called Zinix. We make germ zapping robots. A company called Forefront. We do infection control services for healthcare. That was a kind of funny story because one of my friends said, okay, starting this company, can I join? I'll just kind of be on the board. It won't be a big deal. We just help them with their infectious diseases protocols. They do services for nursing homes. And then we had a pandemic, so he was completely wrong about how much time that was. But yeah, so and just a lot of infectious diseases stuff. Now I have a quiz. So the next thing is a quiz. So here are some things. There's supposed to be 6 things there. I don't know, like dropped off the slide. I will tell you what number 6 is. Number 6 is the number of viruses on Earth. But oh no, that's on the top. Anyway, we'll try this. So here are some numbers, some really big numbers. Here's some things. The idea is to put these in the right order. So I'll give you a second. Like which do we think is the smallest thing here? I think the last one was neurons in the brain, and that is one of the last numbers. So, but really we're just trying to rank these things. So we got neurons in the brain, stars in the universe, viruses on Earth, bacteria on Earth, a really, really fast supercomputer, and viral infections per second. Anyone, what's the smallest one there? Supercomputer.
Viruses on Earth, the type of viruses?
No, just count them up. Just if you would, yeah, people do this. It takes a really long time. So, all right, so the smallest one I heard, neurons in a brain. All right, what do you think's next? It's actually stars in the universe. Oh, no, actually, you're right, supercomputers, like 10 to the 15-ish calculations per second. And then we get to stars in the universe. And then we get to this really fun one, viral infections per second, which is about 10 to the 24. Like right now, and then we get viruses on Earth. So here it is in order, but now we got to 6. There they are, now they fit. So yeah, we have neurons in the brain, it's about that much. Really fast supercomputers, stars in the universe, viral infections per second, that's 10 to the 24. Bacteria on Earth, 10 to the 28. Viruses on Earth, 10 to the 31. And my point here is, our little brain is up against this. to try to figure out what's going on. This is what evolution's doing. It's like over here, and we're over here in this world. And even if to get to this number, this is kind of fun, viral infections per second, to do this many calculations per second, I think we need I think it's like 1 million supercomputers all running right now, like to get to that kind of complexity. So if we do this again, we do a little math on this. So here's our number of infections per second. Here's how many seconds are in a year. This system's kind of been running for like 4 billion years. So this is how many sort of calculations or interactions or infections there's been. So it's like 10 to the 41. So this is this huge number. So this is a very complex, very smart system, very evolved system that we're trying to interrupt. The viruses, bacteria, and most of this happens in the ocean. So now I've got another one because I like to get numbers in perspective. So I'm going to give you COVID, but in Santa Fe's. So here's our assumptions. We got Santa Fe is about 90,000 people. So picture all of Santa Fe driving in from the airport, the whole south side where most of the people are, everything here, about 90,000 people. And about 5.7 billion GDP a year. So those are our assumptions. So if we look at Santa Fe, COVID in Santa Fe, US COVID deaths is 8 Santa Fe's. So every person you see in Santa Fe, every person here, times 8. That's how many people have died from COVID so far. Cases, we got almost 500 Santa Fe's worth of cases of COVID. Because we get just numb to these numbers, right? If we go to global, we've lost 53 Santa Fe's of people in the world, and then we've lost 2,600, in terms of cases, of Santa Fe. So just as you're walking around, just kind of keep that maybe in your head. Like it's a big deal, and we're getting kind of used to it. I really like this one, the COVID cost. So the Biden report, the U.S. COVID costs, they estimated at $16 trillion. $16 trillion have been lost. Like that counts direct cost of care, that counts, lost wages, the whole picture. They're estimated in the Biden pandemic report, $16 trillion. That's 177,000 Santa Fe's all working, for a year that would produce that.
But you mean trillion?
I do mean trillion. Does it say? Golly, numbers are so hard. Thank you. Trillion. So that's the scale of just COVID. So just trying to get some perspective there. So what's next? Well, it's probably coming from animals. So if we think about, where are we with infectious diseases? We're kind of at this place with COVID right now, where as long as we don't have much vaccine breakthrough, we have some stability at the moment. But just because you have one pandemic does not reduce the probability of another pandemic. Like it's substitution, or it's a sampling with replacement. Like just because we're having one now doesn't mean all of these creatures and these reservoirs and these hosts, these pathogens, like this whole process is still churning around. So our probability for another pandemic hasn't really changed, especially if we walk back the restrictions that are in place. So as you think about this, really some of the major pandemic sources are going to be these creatures, these zoonotic creatures, especially bats. And bats are interesting because they have a different immune system. They're like similar enough to us because they're like mice, they're mammals and all that. But because they have to fly every night, their immune system doesn't really ramp up the same kind of inflammation responses and all that. So they can actually harbor all these viruses and still live and spread and fly around. And so they're like little incubators for pandemics. But so this is how it goes. This is how it all works. You get all these different, or we got rabies, we got E. coli 0157, we got Ebola. And they have to kind of pass through a lot of these things in order. It's got to be like the perfect alignment of they go through these different categories, and you've got all these different things can infect. There's all this work going on in this. But so what could be next? We've got Ebola. That's a problem. We've got fun things like Marburg virus. It's really nasty. We've got Lassa fever. We've got, MERS is still sort of figuring out what it's going to do. It's still out there. That one was, and some of these are, the reason they're not pandemics is they're too deadly. They haven't quite hit the formula right. But as those evolve and change, we could see them more. Okay, so now I have another one as we think about, what's coming or what we need to prepare for. I have my inevitable, really scary climate change sign. Okay, brace yourselves. Are you ready? That's really scary. So as things warm up, like this is the deadliest creature on Earth. Like this kills more people, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people every year in Africa. Luckily, there's a new vaccine that came out, about 30% effective, looking at preventing hospitalization. We'll see how that plays out, because if people change their bed net practice, it's something that's being launched now. But this is a scary creature, and as things warm up and these spread out, we've got Zika, we've got malaria, we've got dengue fever, we've got all sorts of organisms. So as climate changes, as things warm up, that's a scary thing. And then what's already here? So now I'm gonna kind of shift a little bit. So those are kind of like the big, infectious diseases things. But what's already here, and what's always and very much often forgotten, is antimicrobial resistance. And I bring this up because it's just a huge impact. It is a known thing. It's happening right now, and there's a lot of deaths, and there's a lot of infections because of this. This was, I think, last week. This article. This was in Stat, which is actually really good. It's a kind of medical news aggregate out of Boston Globe. But this is saying we need to prepare. So what do we have? Well, so this is from the article. So disease-resistant superbugs. So these are organisms that cause infections that are now resistant to one or more antibiotics. So one or more of our tools. They infect right now 3 million people a year in this country and kill. Here it says like the CDC number is 3,500. The real number I think they're right. I think it's like 162,000. That's probably closer to it. So you have this. So these are, and often these are hospital acquired. So people come into a hospital. One thing, they pick up one of these organisms, MRSA, C. diff, those sort of things. So once someone is immune compromised, like someone has cancer, it's the second leading cause of death. So while we have these, amazing developments in treatment, we need to keep those people safe so the treatments can work and have time. So it's a big problem. One of the reasons it's a problem, it's a terrible business, infectious. So if I come out with a new drug, if I'm a pharmaceutical company, I come out with a new cholesterol drug, a new Viagra, and I get a patient, I can give them that cholesterol drug for decades, every day, decades. And I'm getting my revenue from that. If I have a really good anti-infective, I might give that to a person. And plus, there's fewer people with given a particular infection than there are with high cholesterol. But I might give that person that drug for 5 days, 10 days maybe at the max. So I'm not, like, my volumes are just so low. And so the way we're funding the development of antibiotics in this sort of commercial doesn't make sense. It's not working for us. There's some things moving around to change that, but it's really a challenge. And the last fact is interesting. So despite everything, like 1962 was the last class of antibiotics, the last real significant new method of killing things that infect us. So before the pandemic, 2019, we'll go way back, this was the big thing on CDC's mind. This was antimicrobial resistance. They came out with this report in November of 2019, like just before, and basically saying, we have this huge problem of these antimicrobial resistant organisms. And these were their numbers from that report. So you have two different organisms. So they combine in C. diff, which is confusing. So you have antimicrobial resistant organisms. You have Clostridioides difficile, which is the number one hospital pathogen. It causes basically toxic diarrhea. It's just horrible. And they lump those together because the prevention paths are usually the same, but here they split them out. But these numbers are really underestimated, especially on the deaths. And this is really looking at just healthcare. But if you don't like the CDC, in 2016, UNGAS was saying, they had a whole meeting. So UNGAS, United Nations General Assembly Special Session, they had a whole meeting just on this topic. And they've only done that for like HIV, they did it once for chronic disease, maybe once for terrorism. Like, this doesn't happen very often. They had a whole meeting on just this topic, saying we need to do something. And if you don't like them, you can go to Infectious Disease Society of America, and they're just saying this is one of the greatest threats. Again, this is pre-COVID. They say 2 million. The numbers are really frustrating here. But just the cost there is like almost $30 billion a year are going to these hospital-acquired infections. If you don't like them, you go to the UK. And the UK had a report that came out, I think this was 2014. And this one was really, and this has held its ground. Like it's still considered valid. But if you look at this, so here was, 2014, the impact of antimicrobial resistance in terms of GDP loss. So over this time, from 14 to 50, they were estimating $100 trillion of lost productivity, lost life, everything else. And then by 2050, 10 million people a year will die, like unless we kind of do something about infectious diseases. And what there's the summary of that. Why is this a problem? It's because we're really stupid about how we use our antibiotics. We're just like idiots. It's horrible. So 50% of patients in the hospital will get an antibiotic. Here, have an antibiotic. Like, it's just what's done. Outpatient visits, just everybody gets an antibiotic. At least 30% of those are unnecessary. That's actually looking at the hospital side, not looking so much at the outpatient side, where there's probably even more. So we're just giving them away. I like this number, 838 antibiotic prescriptions each year per 1,000 people. Like, that's insane. And then, as if that wasn't enough, so despite all of that uses, 76% of all uses in livestock for growth, because we're taking livestock. I mean, we're creating, if you think about like factory farms, we're creating a perfect opportunity for bacteria and infections and everything else. And the only reason those can happen is because of the antibiotics that we have to give the animals. So we are just completely wasting our antibiotics. And so now, let's take a step and say what are some of these organisms. So these are things you can't pronounce that might kill you. So we're going to practice so you can familiarize. So this one is really common. It's often called C. diff. It's the most common one, and it's pronounced, they're actually I think they're kind of beautiful, like Clostridioides difficile. Clostridioides difficile. Everyone, Clostridioides difficile. Awesome. This one's sort of an up-and-comer. So it's Pseudomonas aeruginosa. You guys are good.
Is there a spell for it?
Right? Exactly. There's like, right? Here, this one is really actually scary. So they've classified this in 2019 as urgent. Carbapenem resistance is the bacterial, the pathway that the bacteria the antibiotics can work at. So these are basically things where there's no treatment. So this is carbapenem resistant Enterobacteriaceae. That one's good. This one's emerging. This has probably moved up there. This was just coming out in 1819, Candida auris. It's a fungal infection, drug resistant. It is almost impossible to remove from the environment. It just, once it's there, it's there. C. diff is also really difficult. It can last, it forms a spore. It's an anaerobic bacteria, so it forms a spore in the presence of oxygen and will be in the environment for like 6 months. It can just survive. So they're just there, and they're very difficult to remove. This is MRSA. Here's some more. We have new forms of gonorrhea. That's lovely. Yeah, so there's just, and this one's also, this is a carbapenem-resistant Acinetobacter. It's actually Acinetobacter baumannii. You have to say the E twice. There's like 2 I's. Yeah, baumannii. But this one's really, really bad. This one is very difficult to treat right now. But the other thing, so we don't only think about infections and getting an infection and the consequence of infections. When we think about healthcare, we need antibiotics to do healthcare. Like, we can't do healthcare. We can't do organ transplants without infection, without antibiotics. We can't do dialysis. We can't do C-sections. We can't do some dental processes. Like, they will cause infections if our antibiotics stop working. And this is some of that scale. Like, all these, sepsis, chronic condensures, all of oncology relies, we're knocking out people's immune systems, and we need a means to protect them, and that is going away. So this was, again, the big issue at CDC before COVID, and I thought this quote was just really kind of striking. Like, we are in a post-antibiotic era. It's already here. We cannot rely on our antibiotics anymore, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and we see this happening. So when we throw COVID in the mix, there was some thought that maybe things were better in the hospitals during COVID because we've got all these infection control practices. But in this survey that came out in August, they all increased. So not only during COVID surges, not only do you have COVID, but you also have this increase in antimicrobially resistant infections. That's not so great. But we have a pandemic plan. So we've got like the coming pandemics, we've got the stuff coming from the bats, we've got all of this coming on, the Ebola, and we've got antimicrobial resistance. So This was launched, I don't know, like 3 weeks ago. We're spending $65 billion over 10 years to prevent a $16 trillion loss. That doesn't seem like enough. $6.5 billion a year to prevent, anyway. So the math on that, so that's spending less than $2,000 per COVID case right now to prevent a future pandemic, to prevent this. Or if we assume a pandemic every 20 years, which is kind of where the estimates are, we're losing $800 billion a year to pandemic and spending 6.5. And just for reference, anti-terror gets $140 billion per year. So there's a problem here, right? There's a problem. There's problems in infection prevention. Fellowships aren't full. Like docs aren't choosing to become infectious disease docs. They get paid less sometimes than GPs. They just get paid these consultant fees, a very complex field. But they still need the extra thing. Obviously it's global, there's no antimicrobial pipeline. We really don't have real surveillance at all. By the time you get to by the time a patient presents and we figure out what that is and we go through that, it's way too late for major prevention. And no one funds prevention. And this, yeah. And so this is, again, from the CDC report. And I really like this, even though they kind of had to, the phrasing's really weird, keep the germs away, but I like this, that it mentions prevention. Because in most reports on pandemics, they don't mention just preventing the case. Every time I prevent an infection, that's an antibiotic that can go be used for someone else. So not only do you get the benefit of preventing the infection, you also preserve that antibiotic. So prevention. So this is sort of my world. This was in the Atlantic, I think a few days ago. I saw this. I thought it was really great. We accidentally solved the flu. Like, congratulations. Last year, 2020, there was no flu. That's great. I mean, normally it's 30 million infections. And 30,000 people die every year from the flu. But there were only 2,000 cases in 2020. 17,000 times reduction in cases. I mean, that's amazing. We can solve the flu. That's really exciting. And in 2020, like 2019, 200 kids died from the flu. 2020, there's like one known death in kids. I mean, we solved the flu. That's like amazing. But we're going to give it all back. We don't want to solve the flu. We don't want to keep that. We're going to give it back. So that's sort of the lay of the land in infectious disease. So now we're going to do a little case study about what I do and where at least I fit into this. And I think it's useful because you can see some of the challenges that we have trying to do prevention. Because nobody funds prevention, and CFOs don't like, there's no, if you do like there's no cost savings line in a CFO's mentality. So they just see it as capital outlay. So here's the problem I'm working on now. So pathogens are in these rooms. So someone comes into a hospital room, they have an illness, they bring in, well, we'll pick on Acinetobacter. So they have Acinetobacter. They will contaminate their areas. SARS-CoV-2 will contaminate the whole area. Then they leave, and housekeeping comes in. EVS will come in. And they're given, in a commercial hospital, they're given 18 minutes to turn the room. 18 minutes. So there's linens, there's towels on the floor, whatever's going on in there. They've got to make it look beautiful. That's the first priority. And then they're supposed to make it pathogen-free in 18 minutes. Sometimes, in a nonprofit hospital, they might get, maybe 28, 30 minutes or so. And it's just not possible. So the studies show they miss about 50% of surfaces. They just never even touch them. So there's like two levels. So I can take a little blacklight dye and I can put it on this. And if I show the black light, it'll light up. And if I go like this, it's gone. And so when you do that, they only do 50% of high-touch surfaces is the little dye gone. But that's not even disinfect it, right? Because to disinfect, I have to scrub it, and I have to let that stay moist for whatever the dwell time is. For some of the chemicals, it's 10 minutes, which is really hard to keep a vertical surface wet for 10 minutes. It doesn't happen. So there's a big problem in this cleaning. Here's one. This is Acinetobacter. Oh, no, I think this was CRE. And these are all the areas where they found CRE after the patient left. This is, there's no treatment. There's very little treatment, almost no treatment for this bacteria. And so this is after the standard cleaning. This room was patient ready for the next patient. Like they were ready to put the next patient in there. And you see all this in there. But the good news, and what I like about this shot is, the camera was here, and they could actually see all the spots. They're all visible from kind of one position in the room. They're not like under the drawers or on the bed. These are high-touch surfaces, but that also means they're accessible. Just threw this in there. That's pretty much how it goes. And so it comes up the question, first we have to figure out what our target organisms are. What are we trying to disinfect? What are the major organisms? And you really end up in this level. If you can get the spores, you can get the bacteria, you can usually get the viruses. The spores are really hardest to kill. So you'll see a lot of stuff in hospital or in infection control looking at C. diff. And that's why, because it's so hard to kill. And these are really fun slides. These were, we took it, so this is, that's MRSA, that I think is an E. coli, Acinetobacter. But we basically covered half the slide and then exposed it to our robot. And then so you can see where it grows and where it doesn't grow. But they're kind of pretty. And then you have another question that we really work on is where. Like this is like a typical floor in a hospital. It's a really complicated place. And so where are these transmissions occurring? You've got courtyards, you've got nurses' stations, you've got patient rooms, all that. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what's the optimum place. Do we only want to do rooms like, okay, this patient had Acinetobacter, so we're going to do that room. But do we have to do these rooms next to it? Has that Acinetobacter left that room? Are these patients at a higher risk because that patient had Acinetobacter? Those sort of questions we did a lot of work on to try to figure out. And our conclusion is really, you've got to do all the patient rooms just basically anytime someone leaves. That's really how you do it, because the risk kind of escapes that room. So it's really, when we think about the unit of analysis, the risk is held by this whole unit. So this whole floor or pod or whatever they're going to call them, because the more people you have in each room with an infection, everyone's risk goes up. So we really got to do a floor-wide intervention. That was one of the things we realized fairly early on. It was really hard to get people to switch the mentality from saying, I have C. diff, so I'm going to do an extra clean for that room, to you're getting C. diff at times on your floor, so you do extra clean everywhere. And that's what impacts the rates. So this is the tools that we're currently using to fight infections in hospitals. They really haven't evolved very much. I think the biggest innovation here is like the microfiber mops. That was like a big thing. Some of the chemicals have gotten a bit better, and the wet wipes are kind of good. But they estimate like the moisture on a wipe, in order to do the whole hospital room, you need about 10 or 15 to have enough dwell time and enough moisture to really get the label claim you want. And so the pathogens keep evolving, but our tools don't. So that's where technology comes in. We need technology to do this. So this is Xenix, and so we're in about 900 hospitals. We have a ton of patents. This is the one I'm most proud of. We have a lot of studies, but we've done over 30 million disinfection cycles. So we've really put it out in there, and that was a key thing, because you want to make sure it's something that can be used routinely by the hospital every single day. So this is our germ zapping robot. It's got, goes online, it talks to us, it phones home, we get a big board, we can see how it's used. It's pretty great. But the real idea is and what we tell the EVS workers is, like, we're not replacing you. You're not doing a bad job. You've been given an impossible job. You've been told to make a room look beautiful and pathogen-free in 18 minutes. And here's a mop, here's a rag. Like, go. Like, it's impossible. So they really need a new tool. And that's what we kind of say. It's like, here's your new tool to do what you've been asked to do. So that's the robot. And but then stepping back is, so what's needed? Obviously, I have a bias here, but we need more robots. We need to solve, room disinfection. We also need to solve a lot of other problems. And apparently we have $6.5 billion to do it. But some things, I think we need an NIH Institute on Prevention. Like, I like the CDC. The CDC's there. But it's something different. Like, we need to be really innovating, finding new things, more core research on that. We need to fix surveillance. Like, EMR is electronic medical records. Like, someone could have an infection in a nursing home and they're sent to the hospital and the records don't transfer and no one knows that person should be isolated. They figured it out 2 days later. And now we've created this whole chain of exposure that the medics transporting didn't know the person was. Like, it's in the medical record. Like, that was the promise of medical records. It's not there yet. We need to educate healthcare workers. Like, we've seen that with the pandemic. We've seen problems around that. We need, and I think one of the key things that we're not doing that we need to do is not just say, hey, we're going to do a pandemic prevention plan. We're going to get a warehouse, and we're going to put a whole bunch of masks in the warehouse and all that, and maybe some really fancy technology or whatever, and then issue that out. Because in a hospital, if you're not drilling all the time, like when it's time to use that stuff, it won't be used right. And there's a hesitancy. If I'm the ER doc and there's like the white powder, I don't want to be the one who accidentally called hazmat and shut my ER down for 8 hours. So if there's something routine that could be placed in there that we already know how to use, we already know how to do, that will fight the AMR, or that will fight these resistant infections, but then we could also repurpose it for pandemic. That makes sense to me. So, but yeah, so there's just a whole bunch of stuff. Regulatory ease. It's really hard to bring a technology into healthcare. There's all the regulatory, all the problems. So that's what's needed, all of this stuff, but what we really need is that. So we need a lot of money for, I tried to get a money heist picture, but it didn't quite work. But there needs to be a lot more funding. And not only from government, public sector, but private sector too. It's when we look at green technology, green investment, sometimes that's socially responsible investing. I think that has to apply for infections. There might not be the absolute best business model, but it can be a good business model. But I know there's a lot of companies that are kind of struggling to they want to develop a new therapeutic, they want to develop a new thing, and there's no funding. So that's what I've got.